Hello and welcome back to the SME Corporate Governance Bootcamp, and today is the fourth in our series of video blogs, and the topic today is all around energising the board of directors. There's never been a more important time to have in place at the top of the organisation an energised and strong leadership team at the board level. This is critical to set the tone and direction of the business and to support and guide and supervise the management to carry out the vision of the business owners. It all comes from the notion that good governance stems directly from the behaviours of the top leaders in the organisation. And if you can energise your board to display and conduct their operations according to a strong set of formal procedures and behaviours, then that's going to cascade right down into the organisation and drive the culture and the performance that you want. Now, in reviewing any board operations, it's important firstly to look at the different types of directors that there are and to understand the relationship and role between them. So the first is the chair of the board, and that person is appointed by the owners of the business and acts as the link between the owners and the board of directors. The chair carries out a lot of very important roles in terms of managing the operations of the board and keeping the owners informed of progress and dealing with issues that arise along the way. Executive directors are those who are working in the business. They are paid a salary for their functional responsibilities, and they are a key link to the board to keep them informed about day-to-day operations, what's happening on the ground in the business. And at the same time, the board can ensure that their decisions and their policies are effectively taken from the boardroom into the day-to-day operations. Non-executive directors are those who may have a financial stake in the business, but they don't have any formal operational role in the day-to-day operations. And that means usually that they bring with them some specific skills or experience or expertise that is critical for the future success of the business. They may also bring networks and commercial relationships that are very important. Independent directors are those who have neither a financial stake nor an operational role in the business. And increasingly, these are seen as being vital for good governance and to provide a challenge to the operation of the board and to provide unbiased opinions about some of the critical decisions that come before the board. This is also a very good indicator of corporate governance maturity in companies for third parties who can see that evidence by the presence of independent directors on the board. The last role or officer role on the board is that of the company secretary, and the company secretary is responsible for the conduct of the board operations, from preparing for the meetings effectively, how those meetings are conducted and arranged, how the minutes of the meetings are kept, and any resolutions or documents that come from the board are properly recorded, stored and communicated into the organisation or externally to third parties, be that banks or lenders or financial authorities or whatever the case may be. Now, if you were to look at a board from an outside perspective and to measure key criteria that demonstrate an effective board, these are areas that you might look at, and you can look at your own board against these criteria. Firstly, that there is a strong culture of respect and openness and constructive debate that takes place in the board meetings. And that means that conflict is controlled, difference of opinions are resolved, and that there is the proper level of open discussion to reach the best decisions for the business. There's also often a presence of independent or external directors on the board. This is a key demonstration of commitment to good governance, of a maturity in the organisation, that they will allow an outside person to come into the area of making decisions and to guiding the future of the organisation. There will be clear evidence also of diversity of experience, styles, backgrounds, gender, and so on in the composition of the board. And this makes sure that there is an avoidance of the herd mentality or people aligning around a particular style or a particular way of operating. That diversity really adds so much now into the decisions and operations of the board, especially when the world is much more diverse and much more complicated than ever before. There will be strong evidence of a very, very effective relationship between the board and the management team. And that means that there is a high degree of trust and a high degree of information flow between the board and the management team. And where that relationship is difficult, the divisions and the differences of opinions are managed effectively, and that there is an honesty and openness to ensure that decisions are quickly made, corrective action is quickly taken, and that when issues arise, they are escalated properly and dealt with by the board as required. There will also be very clear evidence of a common purpose and strategic clarity among the members of the board. And this can only happen, in my view, if there is a written vision statement which the board has properly developed and properly debated and properly signed off to. It's so important to move on from a lack of clarity or differences of nuance or differences of opinion about the core purpose of the business and the main strategies that are there. So much time is wasted at the board level by debating these things which should already be sorted out and resolved. As mentioned before, there needs to be a strong chair to manage the agenda and the relationships between the board members, and also where it arises, and it will arise, to manage conflict. And if the chair of the board is effective in doing that, then the board is going to be much more effective than would otherwise be the case. And lastly, there needs to be an efficient structure and set of processes and flow of information to the board so that they are dealing on a timely basis, on an accurate basis, and on a relevant basis with the right level of information and communication in a structured way to take their decisions and to move the business forward. Now, obviously, every board review and every effective board will be dependent on the scope and scale of the company operations. But those clarity of roles and the criteria or the evidence of an effective board are a good place to start when you're reviewing your own board to identify the areas of focus. Now, normally when you conduct a board review, that should be done in accordance with best practice. That should be done by an outside third party so that there is an unbiased focus on this. But if you are going to do a review of your own board, here are some areas which will set out a clear checklist for you to systematically do that and to establish some benchmarks for you to measure your own board against. First of these is the clarity of role, and that role means the relationship between the ownership of the business and the board is clearly defined, and the relationship of the board and the management is clearly defined, so that there is no interference in each other's roles and there's no duplication of effort. Secondly, that there should be a clear set of reports prepared in advance of all the board meetings, and those will include financial reports, they will include reports on safety or projects or the risk register or investment or environmental or legal cases, whatever the set of regular reports that should be prepared for every board meeting, and they should be circulated in advance. Now, I recommend that board meetings take place at least on a quarterly basis, and that there should be a minimum of 5 meetings per year, the fifth one being the annual general meeting, all taking place in accordance with the Articles of Association. There should also be a clear agenda for every board meeting, a standard agenda for every board meeting, a standard duration, a standard location, and a standard set of outputs, specifically minutes of the meetings and proper recording of resolutions that take place. Third area to look at is how effective the board is in policy making. All major policies in the organisation are set by the board, and that may be financial policies, that may be investment policies, human resource policies, whatever it is. At the high level, they all come from the board, and you need to review the board vis-à-vis recent policies that have been done, how effectively they've been discussed, how effectively they've been communicated, and how effectively they've been implemented in the organisation to identify areas for improvement. The relationship with management is really important, and that should be defined very clearly between the board and the leader of the management team, and how often there should be meetings, how often there should be reviews, and how effective those reviews should be, and the type of culture there should be between the board and the management, and that should all come down right from the top in the organisation. The whole area of business planning is a critical role of the board, and they are responsible to set the criteria for forming the business plan, for constructing the business plan, and for approving the business plan. And ultimately, that straight line between the vision of the business plan, and the KPIs set for management is the role of the board, and how effectively they are doing that is a criteria you can review. The sixth area is the skills and expertise of the board, and you can look now to the future of the business and the vision that you have set out, and look at the critical skills gaps there are at the board level. It's vital for the 2 or 3 major initiatives or the 2 or 3 major skills gaps that gap is plugged at the board level, so that people on the board are properly in a position to supervise the management carrying out the vision of the business. If you don't have the right levels of skills and expertise at the board level, then they are not able to properly supervise and hold management to account. The seventh area is the whole area of financial management. Never been a more critical time to manage the finances and the financial controls in the business. And it is vital that every board has the right level of expertise and experience in all aspects of financing the business, all aspects of cash flow of the business, and all aspects of structuring the finances of the business. If that level of financial acumen is not present on the board, then that is a priority area to be addressed. Decision making is the responsibility of the board, and it is vital that all the decisions that are taken at the board level are properly discussed, properly documented, and properly cascaded into the organisation. Is your board effective at making clear decisions on a timely basis and properly executing those decisions through the leadership team in the business? Succession planning for your board is a vital area. You need to have in place over the next 3 to 5 years, looking at the compilation of your board, any critical gaps or any people who are likely to be retiring or leaving the business, potential illness, etc., so that you are proactively looking at how you will appoint people to the board to replace people or people who will be replaced through rotation. And those succession plans need to be properly discussed and properly documented. Every year there should be a formal review of the board and its conduct and all the directors to make sure that people are working in accordance with the structures of the board and to make sure that the board is doing its role in the business. Just like you hold management accountable, it's vital that the board is held accountable against its own operations. Normally, as I've said, that should be done by an outside party, but if you're honest and you are taking it seriously, you should be able to identify where the areas of action are required. And it's important also to stress that the board is a team, and the board is operating in accordance with the behaviours and the values that there are specified by the business owners. So I would highly recommend that the board sets its own code of conduct in writing, covering all aspects such as how they interact with each other, respect, how they deal with confidential information, and any other areas that are important to you in the business. You can put in place a formal code of conduct which will be written and signed off by the board members. As I've mentioned earlier, it's vital that you look at the structures of your board and you look at the composition of directors. You can also look at forming subcommittees for your board, whereby particular topics or particular projects or particular areas of operation can be taken offline by a subcommittee taken from the board. They can then come back to the board and suggest recommendations based on their research. That's a highly effective way of working, and normally it will include topics such as executive remuneration. It may include financial and audit committee. It may include a people HR committee, or a committee focused on a large project or a large initiative important to the organisation. And connected to the board structures, you should also look at remuneration of the board. And this is really important. Everybody on the board who is entitled to should be receiving a transparent fee structure, and it should be in accordance with what the company can afford. And there are lots of ways to structure that remuneration. You have to make sure that it complies with the code of conduct of any corporate governance requirements, but you can look at things like shares, you can look at profit share, and you can look at fees, you can look at barter arrangements, lots of different ways to remunerate the board and to make sure that accordingly the directors will commit to and be incentivized to play their role on the board. And lastly, it's important that the board looks at its external communications, and that is every decision, every aspect of the board operations are focused and controlled and given a consistent message when you're talking especially to outside parties, be they to banks or be they to investors or be they to the press or whatever, that all the board decisions, all the board operations are treated confidentially, and there's a consistent line, a consistent approach to external communications. So I hope that checklist has given you some areas to consider and to look at and identify gaps in your current board structures, some benchmarks that are out there, and then you can look at an action plan to address improving the operations of your board. So to wrap up, I would contend that an active board is essential to the future success of the business, and there's never been a more important point in time to transfer the role of your board from being just a passive one to being a very proactive and entity that contributes to the success of the business. Obviously, there are lots of different aspects to tailoring and formalizing the board operations, and every company will take the steps that it needs to meet its own individual needs. And the bottom line is that if you get the things right at the board level, then that's going to drive good governance right through the organization and build the culture and the success that you want to achieve. I hope that's been useful, and please get in contact with me on my email or on Twitter. And our next topic that we'll be addressing tomorrow will be the whole area of improving risk management, and I hope you'll be able to join me. Thanks very much.